The hallway is quiet. Fluorescent lights hum softly above, casting a pale, white glow across the narrow employee dormitory. A middle-aged woman walks slowly down the corridor wearing a housekeeping uniform for the first time in her life. The fabric feels unfamiliar against her skin. Stiff, cheap, slightly too large around the shoulders. Behind her, a luxury suitcase rolls heavily across the floor. Its polished surface reflects the harsh fluorescent light. Too elegant for this place. Too expensive for someone now cleaning hotel rooms. The younger employees notice immediately. Small glances, half-hidden whispers. Middle-class collapse. Someone abandoned her. She still carries that suitcase? No one says it loudly. But humiliation rarely needs volume. Sometimes, human beings can feel judgment through silence alone. She keeps walking quietly without lifting her eyes. She reaches the end of the hallway. Room 407. A narrow metal door waits silently beneath the flickering fluorescent light. For a few seconds, she simply stands there, holding the handle of the suitcase, as if crossing this doorway means admitting that her former life has truly ended. Years ago, her mornings looked different. Soft apartment lighting, fresh coffee steaming quietly beside the window, carefully chosen clothes hanging neatly inside a spacious closet. Dinner reservations, office conversations, polite smiles, the quiet performance of stability, and somewhere inside all of it, she believed sacrifice could protect her. If she loved enough, endured enough, kept everything emotionally together, life would remain safe. But slowly, the emotional exhaustion accumulated. The financial pressure deepened, and the relationship collapsed quietly from the inside long before it collapsed visibly from the outside. Applications are sent everywhere. Office jobs, reception work, management positions, administrative roles, each resume carefully organized, each email written politely, each interview entered with the remaining fragments of professional confidence. But one by one, the answers return. We've chosen another candidate. We're looking for someone with more recent experience. We'll contact you if another position becomes available. Again and again. Not because intelligence disappeared, not because capability vanished, but because survival interrupted life for too many years. Years emotionally managing a collapsing relationship. Years preserving peace inside invisible tension. Years carrying emotional responsibilities the modern world does not know how to measure. And slowly, something deeper than disappointment begins settling inside her body. Not failure, displacement, as if the world no longer knows where to place her anymore. The modern world moves quickly, too quickly for people who spent years simply trying to emotionally survive. Technology changes, industries evolve, younger faces arrive everywhere, and quietly, middle age begins carrying a strange kind of invisibility, especially for women, because society often celebrates women when they are beautiful, productive, supportive, needed, but very rarely when they are rebuilding. One afternoon, she sits alone outside a small cafe, holding another rejection email inside her phone. Traffic moves nearby. People continue walking past her. Office clothes, coffee cups, ordinary lives continuing forward, and suddenly, a painful realization rises quietly through her chest. The world does not pause just because your life collapsed. And perhaps that is why starting over can feel so humiliating. Not because beginning again is wrong, but because life continues moving while your identity is still breaking apart. Reality begins stripping away the final protection of pride. Savings become smaller, options become fewer, and slowly, the jobs she once believed were beneath her become the only jobs available. Cleaning rooms, changing sheets, pushing heavy cart through endless hotel hallways. At first, her ego resists violently. This is not who I am. I used to have a different life. I studied for more than this. But survival has a way of confronting illusion directly. One sentence lingers quietly in the air. Starting from the bottom may look like taking the longer road, but sometimes it is the most stable road forward. And suddenly, cleaning rooms no longer feels like failure. It feels honest. Because for the first time in years, survival is no longer dependent on emotional attachment, someone else's mood, or the fragile stability of a collapsing relationship. Now, effort creates survival directly. Physical effort, real effort, grounded effort. And strangely, something inside her nervous system begins trusting life differently. That night, inside the narrow dormitory room, she sits quietly on the edge of the bed. The suitcase rests beside her under the pale fluorescent light. Its polished surface still looks beautiful, but suddenly it no longer feels luxurious, only heavy, like carrying the remains of a former self that life is slowly asking her to release. And perhaps that is the hardest part of starting over. Not losing the house, not losing the money, not even losing the relationship, but losing the identity that once made suffering feel meaningful. Because sometimes human beings do not stay attached to comfort itself. They stay attached to the version of themselves that existed inside that comfort. The respected woman, the stable woman, the woman whose life still appeared intact. And perhaps life does not remove comfort first. It removes the version of yourself the world once respected. And perhaps that is where the deepest transformation begins. Not when life suddenly improves, not when suffering disappears, but when human beings stop organizing their entire existence around being admired. Because after identity collapses, after dependence collapses, something else quietly collapses too. The performance, the exhausting need to appear successful, stable, important, emotionally composed. And strangely, when there is no image left to maintain, the nervous system sometimes begins breathing differently. Not happier, safer. There is something deeply humbling about repetitive work. Cleaning the same rooms, changing the same sheets, scrubbing the same floors, day after day. No applause, no recognition, no prestige, only exhaustion. At first, the body resists everything, the early mornings, the aching shoulders, the chemical smell lingering on her hands even after washing them repeatedly at night. Sometimes, she returns to the dormitory, so tired she falls asleep, still wearing part of the uniform. And yet, beneath all the exhaustion, something unexpected quietly begins happening. The work stabilizes the body, not emotionally, not spiritually, physically, because for the first time in years, Her nervous system is no longer surviving through emotional unpredictability. No more monitoring someone's moods. No more waiting for emotional explosions. No more silently calculating how to keep peace from collapsing. Now, life becomes strangely simple. Move, clean, fold, carry, breathe, repeat, and slowly, the body begins trusting the ordinary rhythm of reality again. One early morning, she stands alone inside an empty hotel hallway before sunrise. Vacuum cleaners hum faintly somewhere downstairs. The city outside is still dark. She pauses quietly, holding fresh white towels against her chest. And suddenly, another realization appears. For most of her life, her nervous system was surviving through appearance, trying to maintain stability, respectability, emotional control, the image of a life still functioning. But now, there is no image left to maintain, no social role to protect, no one expecting her to appear impressive. And strangely, beneath all the humiliation, her body begins feeling slightly less divided, slightly less performative, slightly more real, not healed, not peaceful, but honest. And perhaps that is the strange paradox hidden inside social collapse. Sometimes, when human beings lose the identity they worked hardest to protect, they slowly begin discovering the self that existed underneath it all along. The whispers continue quietly around her, too old to restart, trying to stay elegant while cleaning, fallen, pathetic. No one says these things directly, but human beings often communicate judgment without words, through tone, through glances, through subtle social distance. At first, every look feels sharp. Every interaction feels slightly humiliating. She walks faster through hallways, avoids eye contact, lowers her head while pushing heavy carts past guests. But slowly, something changes. No explanations are offered, no self-defense, no desperate attempts to recover admiration, only quiet work, folding sheets, replacing towels, cleaning mirrors, and somewhere inside that repetitive silence, another kind of strength slowly begins forming. Not image, not status, something steadier, something quieter. A strength no longer dependent on being impressive, because perhaps human beings only begin touching real dignity when they no longer require constant recognition in order to feel valuable. One morning, soft gold light enters quietly through the curtains of an empty hotel room. Dust moves slowly through the air. For a few seconds, everything becomes still. She smooths fresh bed sheets carefully with both hands. And suddenly, a strange realization appears. For years, survival was emotionally dependent on someone staying, someone loving her, someone not leaving, someone not changing. But now, survival becomes connected to personal effort again, to movement, to labor, to grounded reality. And perhaps that is why ordinary work can sometimes become strangely healing. Not because physical labor is glamorous, but because grounded effort quietly reconnects human beings to their own capacity. The body begins remembering, I can still function, I can still move, I can still survive. And somewhere beneath that realization, something long forgotten begins returning slowly, self-respect. The changes are subtle at first, almost invisible. She begins sleeping slightly deeper at night. The constant tightness in her chest softens a little. The panic surrounding the future becomes less consuming. Not because life suddenly improves, but because the nervous system is slowly learning that survival no longer depends entirely on emotional attachment. One evening, another employee complains loudly about how exhausting the work is. The older woman listens quietly while folding fresh towels nearby, and unexpectedly, she notices something strange. She no longer feels ashamed of the work itself. Tired. Yes. Physically exhausted. Yes. But ashamed. Not in the same way anymore. Because somewhere along the way, the labor stopped feeling degrading and started feeling honest. No manipulation, no emotional performance, no pretending, only direct effort exchanged for survival. And strangely, that simplicity begins feeling cleaner than much of the life she lived before. One late evening, she finishes cleaning the final room of the day. Her back aches softly. Her hands feel dry from cleaning chemicals. Outside the hotel windows, the city lights glow against the darkening sky. She stands alone for a moment inside the empty room. No guests, no noise, only silence. And suddenly, tears quietly rise in her eyes. Not from sadness, something deeper, relief. Because after everything collapsed, after the humiliation, the rejection, the financial fear, the loss of identity, she's still here, still standing, still breathing, still moving forward. And perhaps that is the moment real dignity quietly returns. Not through admiration, not through status, not through becoming impressive again, but through the realization I did not abandon myself even when life became difficult. And perhaps that is the strange thing about rebuilding yourself slowly. At first, human beings believe they are learning how to survive again, but underneath survival, another process quietly begins unfolding. Awareness, not as philosophy, not as spirituality, but as exhaustion finally becoming deep enough to stop defending the ego every moment. Because after enough humiliation, after enough collapse, after enough failed attempts to preserve identity, something inside human beings sometimes becomes still, not defeated, still. And perhaps that stillness is where another kind of seeing begins. One day, an unfair complaint appears. A guest reports missing money. Another employee made the mistake. But quietly, the blame is handed over to the person easiest to sacrifice. The older woman stands silently inside the manager's office. Bright white lighting, cold air conditioning, a clipboard resting heavily against the desk. Questions begin. Did you enter the room alone? Why wasn't this reported earlier? Are you sure you checked carefully? The accusation is never fully spoken directly, but she can feel it forming quietly in the room. Suspicion, disappointment, social judgment moving invisibly through the air. Years ago, this moment would have shattered her emotionally. The old ego would have fought desperately, demanded fairness, protected its image, explained its innocence again and again until someone finally understood. But now, something inside her remains strangely still. Not calm, not emotionless. Still. Because the pain still appears, the humiliation still appears, the tightness inside the chest still appears, the nervous system still reacts, but somewhere beneath all of it, another layer of awareness has quietly begun forming. The ego screams immediately. This is unfair. They should know the truth. I don't deserve this. And yet, something deeper continues quietly watching. Watching the fear, the anger, the humiliation, the desperate human need to remain innocent inside other people's eyes. As if awareness itself has begun separating from the role being attacked. And suddenly, she notices something strange. The accusation hurts, but it no longer completely defines her existence, because perhaps the deepest suffering was never criticism itself. Perhaps the deepest suffering was the unconscious belief that identity depended entirely on external perception. Praise meant safety. Blame meant collapse. Admiration meant worth. Rejection meant disappearance. But awareness begins seeing through that structure slowly. That evening, she returns to the dormitory room. No dramatic breakdown, no emotional explosion, only exhaustion. Outside the small window, rain drifts across distant city lights. She removes the cleaning gloves and places them beside the sink. The room feels smaller tonight. Still, for several moments, she simply sits there listening to the sound of rain against the glass. And gradually, another realization begins forming. For most of her life, she believed survival depended on protecting identity. Protecting respectability, competence, being understood, being seen correctly by others. But human life changes too easily. Status changes. Relationships change. People misunderstand each other constantly. The world praises one version of you today and abandons another tomorrow. And perhaps that is why attachment to identity creates endless suffering, because the role itself was never stable. Meanwhile, awareness continues existing beneath all of it, watching, unmoving, untouched in a deeper way than the ego can fully understand. Late at night, a luxury hotel room stands silent. City lights glow softly beyond tall glass windows. Rain moves quietly across the distant streets below. A woman in a housekeeping uniform slowly folds fresh white towels inside the room of a guest who still lives inside the kind of life she once had. Luxury perfume lingers faintly in the air. Designer shoes rest neatly beside the bed. A half-finished glass of wine stands near the window. Years ago, this room would have felt familiar, a world she once understood, a world where appearance still mattered, where identity still depended on stability, admiration, being perceived correctly by others. But now, she moves quietly through the room without resentment, without envy, only stillness. And strangely, for the first time in years, she no longer feels outside of life, only inside a different part of it. She wipes the mirror slowly with practiced movements. No performance, no explanations, no image left to maintain anymore, only presence. And gradually, another understanding begins emerging. Perhaps hitting bottom was never punishment. Perhaps life was removing everything false. The performance, the dependence, the exhausting emotional bargaining for safety. The illusion that external stability could permanently protect human beings from uncertainty. Because life changes everyone eventually. Bodies change. Relationships change. Status changes. The world forgets people quickly, and perhaps suffering becomes unbearable only when human beings desperately try to preserve identities that life itself was never designed to keep permanent. She lowers her eyes toward her reflection inside the polished mirror. Uniform, tired eyes, aging hands, And yet, something inside her feels strangely undivided now. For most of her life, she believed strength meant maintaining control, holding everything together, protecting appearances, protecting the version of herself the world respected. But real life slowly dismantled all of it. Not violently, quietly. Through exhaustion, through disappointment, through humiliation, through the long, painful process of becoming ordinary again. And perhaps that was the true transformation, because somewhere along the way, life stopped asking her to become more impressive and started asking her to become more real. The chandelier turns softly above her. Rain continues falling quietly beyond the windows. For a few seconds, she simply stands still in the center of the silence, breathing, and quietly. Another truth finally settles inside her nervous system. Lowering yourself to the ground is not surrender. It is how human beings finally touch the strongest part of themselves. Because once everything false collapses, only something real remains. Not status, not image, not admiration, presence, awareness, the simple ability to continue walking through life without abandoning yourself anymore. She reaches down quietly and lifts the old luxury suitcase beside the wall. This time, it feels lighter, not because life became easier, but because the identity inside it has finally become smaller. Voice softens. Because once you have touched the bottom, there is only one direction left to go. Forward.
When pride falls into the wind, I carried kingdoms on my shoulders, built my worth from silent wars, smiled while breaking underneath me, locked my tenderness behind closed doors. I thought strength meant never bending, never trembling, never asking to be held. So I wore pride like shining armor, while my spirit slowly fell. But the sky does not apologize for changing after every storm, and the ocean never loses dignity by returning to its formless form. So let the pride fall into the wind, let the mask finally loosen. I would rather live one honest breath than die inside illusion. I am done shrinking for survival, done worshiping fear as control. Now I walk this earth wide open, with thunder inside my soul. No more chains made out of image, no more prisons built from shame. Freedom is not becoming fearless, it is walking anyway. There were nights I called it wisdom, but it was only fear disguised. Fear of failure, fear of softness, fear of meeting my own eyes. So I kept performing strength like a soldier with no war, until exhaustion gently whispered, you were never meant to fight yourself this hard. Oh, and maybe courage was never loud at all. Maybe courage was simply standing naked, without the armor, without the role, without needing the world to explain my soul. Long silence. The mountains do not compete. The rivers do not pretend. The birds do not ask permission. Just sing again. So why should I let the old identity burn slowly, like autumn turning gold? I no longer need perfection to believe my life is whole. Now the wind moves through me freely. Now the horizon calls my name, and every step away from fear feels like returning home again. No more living for approval. No more kneeling before pain. I choose the road of open skies, wild-hearted, untamed. And if the world cannot understand me, let it pass like passing rain. Because the soul becomes enormous the moment pride dissolves away. One slow breath, one open heart, one human being, finally unafraid to live.